welcome everyone. Those of you connected a few weeks ago, this is the second in our series in the conversation about Aldgate. My name's Ian Mulcahey. I'm the chair of the Aldgate Connect Business Improvement District, one of the freshest, newest business improvement districts in London. And we have a unique position sitting on the edge of the City of London and the edge of Tower Hamlets. So we're a cross-border business improvement district. And I've got a great group of panelists today representing that cross of the two authorities. As many of you may be are familiar with or understand, we're all in a conversation about how to get back to normal, if there is such a thing as a new normal. So many organizations, I think, are wrestling with this issue about how we get our staff back into the office, not necessarily back to work. And I've heard a few people say back to work. I think many of us have got staff working in a variety of places. And I think the challenge is how do we get people back into the office buildings? And again, one of the characteristics of Aldgate, yes, it has a big residential population, but it has a very significant amount of office space and an amount of employment space. So we as a business improvement district are really trying to understand what needs to be done and how we can all help with that process. And we're also trying to understand what businesses are looking to do to help their staff navigate back to the new normal, as I think we're all now referring to it. I've got a great team of panelists, and I just wanted to whiz round and have them all quickly introduce themselves, and then we'll kick off the conversation. And at the end of our quick conversation, probably allocate about half an hour to that, we'll open it up for another 30 minutes to allow all of you to engage in observations, comments, questions with us. So just to whiz round quickly, Peter, do you want to just kick off first and explain who you are?
Sure. Thanks, Ian. I'm Peter Jones, and my company is the HR department. We provide outsourced HR and employment law support to small and medium-sized businesses. We've got about 50 clients in and around the City of London and Aldgate area. So good to see you all.
Terrific. Xenia.
Hi, everyone. Zenya Kumi. I'm a public health specialist at the City of London Corporation.
Terrific. Kieran.
Hi, I'm Kieran McCartan from TfL's Local Communities and Partnerships team, covering the City of London. So we're engaging with stakeholders and businesses as we try and get businesses back into the city and operating again.
Fantastic. Annie.
Hi, I'm the Head of Operations for Hyperion Insurance Group. We're based in the building at 1 Church Place, so leading onto Aldgate Square. And we've had some staff back in the office, so I can share that experience with you.
Terrific. Fiona. Fiona, I don't know if you can hear me, but we're finding it very hard to hear you. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but we'll have another go in a few minutes and see if it improves a little bit. And Ray, just returned in time to introduce yourself.
We're back in time. What's the chances? Hello. IT's an issue. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I'll begin with Ray Marskell, Chief Inspector City of London East, responsible for our neighbourhood policing. And I'll be looking at the East sector, which is the Aldgate partnership footprints.
Terrific. Thank you, Ray. Good. Well, to get straight into it, I just wanted to kick off with you, Peter, just to give us, you've got a fascinating business at the sharp end, I would say, of this whole question about do we bring staff back? How do we bring staff back? I just wonder if you could just give us a little bit of insight to what you're seeing and what different businesses are actually doing.
Sure, thanks, Ian. Yeah, I've got to say, this has probably been the most bizarre year I've ever experienced in my life, particularly from a work perspective. So there's been a number of challenges that have occurred during this time with regards to employment and employment law and HR. So with regards to what we're seeing right now, I would say at this moment in time, we're seeing very few businesses who have staff who are able to work from home are insisting on staff coming back to the workplace. Very few at the moment. I think some businesses are now starting to open up their offices, but it's largely done on a voluntary basis. But I suspect in time, there will be more of a push really to get staff back into the workplace, obviously in COVID secure conditions as well, and that's absolutely key. So we are in discussions with one or two of our clients certainly about how they go about doing that, and that's something we can talk about certainly, I think, as the discussion progresses.
And what's the sort of common horizon date? Because when we all had this conversation with the Aldgate Connect bid a few months ago, actually September was a horizon date. I think a lot of people have thought, well, after the summer holidays, I think things will start to return to normal, and we would expect to be returning our staff. And here we are in September. It feels like for many of us, we're only just beginning the journey. And again, there's a lot of talk in the press about, well, actually organisations saying, you know what, we're not really going to do anything meaningful till January or March next year. March, interestingly, being almost the anniversary of this whole thing for many of us. And even organisations talking about June next year as a target. Do you get any sense of a pattern forming around that?
I think it's sector specific, so it depends really. So, I mean, with regards to hospitality and restaurants, they're making plans as soon as possible really to get staff back. So some companies obviously have brought staff back, but certainly restaurants in and around the centre of London, it's a little bit more staged in terms of they're waiting for some people to come back to work in offices as well. So that's being coordinated. Other types of organisations, particularly in the service sector, I think that the landscape is a bit further out. So I'm not getting much inclination from clients to say that they're going to be bringing staff back this year. They're looking more towards the early part of 2021. And even then, it's going to be a staged return to work. I don't think anyone's talking about getting all their employees back at the same time. I think it's going to be more open the offices up for people to come in, particularly if they haven't got the space to work at home, which is a key consideration.
Yeah. And again, I sense that as well, that and again, we in our own organisation in Gensler, who work in the Aldgate area, we're now moving the conversation to one of, everyone's hung up with, and even the government are hung up, it's kind of work versus home sort of scenario. But actually, the question really is, what is it I need to go to the office to do? So what is the activity I need to carry out that I can better carry out at work than I perhaps could carry out at home? And are you hearing that same debate?
Absolutely. Particularly within the service sector. So a lot of the noise we're hearing about this at the moment is that offices, the use of offices may well change at some point in the future. Mm-hmm. So day-to-day activities may be undertaken from home, but the office space we use more for collaboration, for meetings, for where people need to, share ideas and opinions on things. Yeah. I think we've got a long way to go before that really pans out. And I suspect, just from talking to clients and talking to my own staff, I think people are quite keen to get back to the office as a general rule of thumb, but they would like some flexibility about working at home as well. And I see that it's going to be a blended approach really going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to switch to Annie for a second. So Annie, Hyperion Group, where do you guys stand at the moment on this?
Yeah, so we reopened fairly early actually. We opened on the 6th of July, but very much on a voluntary basis. We're based on the 10th floor through to the 17th floor in One Church Place. And it's really difficult for us on social distancing in particular to get all our people up to the trading floors, so via the lifts. But we felt it was quite important to open early because we did have a number of staff that were struggling. Their home environment wasn't particularly conducive to having office set up, particularly some of our younger staff who were in flat or house shares in London, didn't have their own personal space to work in. So from a mental health and support point of view, there were a number of cries from people that they really needed something additional. So we opened fairly early on. We roughly, I think those first few weeks in July, we probably had between 2 to 5% of our staff back in. So very, very small numbers. That has slowly crept up in August. We have had a lot of people who've wanted to come in almost on a one-off basis just to check that they can make the journey and to see how comfortable the journey is, because people are concerned about public transport, I think, still. And also just to check how they kind of manoeuvre and walk, sort of manage the office space now, because it's very different. We've had to introduce one-way systems in certain areas. Not all of our meeting rooms, the capacity has changed, things like that. This week, actually, we've seen a stepped increase. So today we've got about 23% of staff back in. So that's a real jump from the beginning of July. Yeah. At the moment, we're still not pushing people to come back, but we're trying to encourage it as much as we can, because I do think it's good for people to have that mixed environment. We think with social distancing, we can probably cater for around 45% of our workforce safely and happily. So at the moment, we can't encourage everybody to come back in, because we just wouldn't be able to get them in and out of the building safely, and we wouldn't be able to cope with that. But we're expecting to see that number hopefully rise up towards the 40% over the coming weeks.
Interesting. And have you, how have you dealt with this? Have you been surveying staff and trying to get a feel for what the appetite is to come back or not come back? How are you managing that process?
We've done that on a very informal basis rather than making it too formalised. So we have an awful lot of team dialogue and team communication with people. Our role in the insurance broking world is predominantly client and market facing, so we have an awful lot of face-to-face contact normally with people. We would normally be out talking to insurers, we would be into Lloyd's of London, we would have a lot of client meetings in. So people are used to having that kind of face-to-face contact, and we think that's a really important that we don't lose that going forward. So we wanted to make the office space available as soon as we could for that purpose. So it was almost that the business felt that we should offer it as an option rather than waiting to see if staff were pushing to come back in, if that makes sense.
Because again, that's been quite an interesting debate I've heard from a few organisations where we're going to allow our staff back, but we're not going to be able to accommodate meetings or clients coming into the office. It's a private thing rather than a public thing. And again, I guess different firms seem to be taking different approaches there.
Yeah, we started off saying we'd have no external visitors just because we wanted to make sure that we were comfortable in our space and that we knew how to manage it, I think, as much as anything. Yeah. We have moved on from that now. If guests do want to come into our building, we're sharing our risk assessments with them. We're making sure we've got their records for track and tracing purposes. But we are opening up our meeting space now, and we are encouraging that dialogue between clients and our staff, or between insurance brokers and underwriters and ourselves. So there's not been a huge take up on that, I'll have to be honest. I think the travelling into London, particularly if clients are based outside of London, I think is causing some nervousness. Yeah. But the option's there now, and the space is available, and it has been used a few times.
Yeah, brilliant. Xenia, so you're obviously working in the City of London, and the City of London's wrestling with all of this, and I guess people are reading the city asking them what organisations should be doing. And I know you come from a sort of public health sort of background. I guess the picture for everyone, whether it's a private individual or a business, is obviously the news changes every 5 minutes, and 1 minute it looks things are getting better, and the next minute it looks like things could be getting an awful lot worse. And then the guidance changes all the time. It's a lot to keep up with, isn't it?
Yes, it's well, first of all, thank you very much to Aldgate BID for inviting me along today. Yeah, it's I think really key to all of this is communications, just in terms of making sure that stakeholders have the information that they need to be able to do what they have to do to sort of operate as a business or as an individual even, and especially as sort of it's very much a changing situation. It's a relatively new virus. We're learning things about it all the time, and so the guidance is changing. And so in order for sort of the City Corporation as a public health team, we're very conscious of that. So in terms of making communication really clear for our businesses, for example, one of the things that we've done is we have pull together a local outbreak control plan for the city in Hackney, because we have a joint public health service. And so this sort of basically outlines, what we're doing in terms of COVID-19 and all the various partners that we need to work with in terms of outbreak control and management. As part of that, we've developed some standard operating procedures, and these are for a range of different settings. So one of them is for workplaces, and a wide variety of workplaces, sort of recognising the diversity of businesses in the city. So large footprint offices, shared spaces, co-working spaces. And what these standard operating procedures do is sort of take the principles of outbreak control and management and prevention and basically outline the process. So there's things around businesses identifying a single point of contact that we can liaise with. How might they find out about an outbreak linked to their setting, or how could they inform the authorities if they find out about one, and then what happens next. So it's a really sort of clear set of processes and procedures that we've been trying to communicate with all our settings, just so that they're aware of, what happens if there is an outbreak, what can you do, and what support can you access through the local authority as well. I can also talk a bit more later about sort of general communications, so information about the importance of face and hand hygiene, and around social distancing, and all the other sort of preventative measures, and also signposting to various bits of guidance, either from the government or from trade bodies, for example.
Zena, that's really helpful. And how do people access some of this information? Is it all on the City of London website? Is that the...
Yes, so there's a couple of ways that that businesses can access this information. It is all available on the City Corporation website. I must say, though, while the guidance is effectively the same, there will be differences in terms of local authorities for some of their processes. So if you are a business in Tower Hamlets, I'd very much encourage you to reach out to Tower Hamlets public health team and look on their website as a sort of starter for 10. And so the corporation website is one channel, and then we've also got Business Healthy. So Business Healthy is a network that sits in the public health team of the City Corporation. I lead that network, and the aim of Business Healthy really is to provide support and signposting to businesses in the city, no matter what their sector or size. And so we have a website, businesshealthy.org, and through our membership we also send out newsletters, and that's really got all of the information and guidance. As it sort of gets updated, we ping it across to our members, so they've got it there and they can access it.
Fantastic. And Zena, the city is always in an extraordinary situation. It with such a huge number of people who travel in to work, and a relatively modest residential population. You've got in excess of 500,000 people who would normally be working in the city, and it was just interesting to hear from Annie how it's ramped up from 2 or 3% coming into the office to nearer 20% now. Do you get a sense of what proportion of the city's population are now kind of coming back to work regularly? Have you got any sense of how those numbers are panning out now?
It's a great question. I mean, obviously, yeah, as you said, before sort of lockdown in March, we had over 500,000 people coming in every day just for work. That has dropped off massively. It is increasing slowly, and especially sort of we're talking about this September sort of milestone, and we are seeing more businesses bring staff back in. That's not sort of across the board, but there's been a lot sort of taking place with strategic transportation colleagues, and perhaps Kieran wants to talk a bit more about this.
Absolutely.
Because this is his area of expertise. But in terms of road mapping, diverting traffic, and just creating more space, because we have got some big roads in the city, but we also have a lot of alleyways, and to be able to sort of accommodate that level of footfall, there's been quite a lot done in terms of redirecting traffic, creating more space for pedestrians and cyclists, and also a lot of support for businesses in terms of helping their staff to cycle in and to walk more as well, taking pressure off public transport.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Kieran, I think that's a very good connector with you from sort of TfL's point of view. Kind of heroic efforts through the darkest days of March and April to keep the system of transport running, and again many key workers hugely dependent on that to get to hospitals and to care for people. But I suppose we're into a different stage now, which is trying to ramp back up to a normal service again, and starting to think about actually volumes of people traveling again rather than handfuls of people traveling again. Where is TfL at on that?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and I think just sort of recognising the work we had to do in the early days with our messaging and getting that out really quickly was key in terms of communicating with customers and businesses. In terms of the state of play now, obviously the Mayor and City Hall are very committed to get our service back up to near pre-COVID levels. So as of this week, I think we've got tube levels at 95%. And Chalk Farm station is the only tube station I'm aware of, along with Terminal 4 at Heathrow on our network, that is currently closed. So you've certainly seen a big revamp of the stations reopening, and sort of combined with that, we're obviously working with boroughs and local authorities to sort of deliver our street space programme, which will create more space for walking and cycling. So in the city, obviously we've got the A10 corridor, Bishopsgate, which is seen as introduced sort of bus gates, which will only allow buses and cyclists up there between 7 till 7. But in terms of the big strategic picture, I think we're definitely moving towards the levels that we were beforehand, and we're seeing that in the latest data. I think for this week, the ridership is around 35%. At the peak of lockdown, it was 5%. So we are definitely seeing in the last week these numbers continuing to rise, and that's what we expect to happen. But obviously, the government announcement yesterday could shift things again.
Sure.
And we'll be sort of ready to adapt and evolve our messaging and our services depending on what's asked of us.
It's so good to see the trend that's taking place in getting the services up and running again. Again, it is fascinating, the conversations we hear in our business, but I'm sure many people are hearing, is that nervousness about travel has been one of the kind of reasons people are slightly reticent perhaps of going back to the office, and their preference perhaps for working from home again. But is there a sense that, again, when the tubes are quiet, and if it's only 35%, actually there's probably no need to be particularly fearful because there's plenty of space to move around? But again, in the same way we are with our offices, where we're kind of, as Annie was saying, kind of hitting a point where you think, well, actually, we really couldn't get beyond a 45%, 50%, I keep hearing, occupancy and keep the social distancing requirements. Is there a kind of a planning target for the underground that says, notwithstanding the number of trains running, we can really only accommodate 50% of the passengers? Is there a number that people are thinking of?
I'm not aware of a specific figure. I mean, on your point about safety and people feeling safe to travel, I mean, we've installed 1,000 sort of hand sanitizers. Our cleaning regime has ramped up massively, particularly at large interchanges, which there's a couple in the city. So I think, from very early on, the Mayor and City Hall were making the case to us to make sure that not only were we putting in these measures, but we're also visibly doing it so that the public feels safer. And the recent survey from last week that we had showed that, confidence in what we're doing at the minute is at around 70%. And obviously we need to kind of build on that to increase those levels. But I don't see that there's a sort of quota on where we feel we can't go beyond that. I think the whole strategy around freeing up space on our sort of pavements and our streets is something we're combined with the sort of the measures around enforcement with face masks as well, to give that safety element as well, that people feel comfortable that when we say that these things are in place, that they are going to be followed up with. So I think it's sort of a two-way approach in terms of our strategy. It's getting people to think about walking and cycling as well where they can, and then also travelling at quieter times if that's possible as well.
Yeah, and that was a question I was going to add to, which was, again, I think a lot of businesses are saying, actually, if you come back, you could be more flexible with your hours, you could travel off peak. Is there a pattern emerging? Are we seeing a rush hour again in the morning and not in the evening, or as many people would argue that it was a rush hour all day perhaps before? But is it more evenly spread, the number of passengers, or is it quite peaky in the mornings and evenings again?
From the latest data I've seen, I think it's still sort of following the trends that were there typically before the coronavirus broke out. But because numbers are down on what they were, it probably doesn't feel as busy as it would at those peak times, and we're able to manage it right now. The question is, how, as you said earlier, how do we move on from that as numbers continue to rise, and we still need to get those levels in place. And it's at that point, I think our messaging around alternative travel modes are going to be really key in terms of getting the public to think about their journeys when they need to travel, and sort of the modes they take.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Just to jump back to Peter, one of the questions that are going through a lot of people's mind is that this has changed the way we are going to think about working or work for forever, really, and that the old world is the old world, and we're now entering a new world where, and again, we're seeing this conversation in our business, and I'm sure other businesses are doing it also, saying, well, actually, we'll probably never return 100% of all our staff to the office again. Actually, we'll probably be having people work from lots of different locations. It's not just at the analog home or office, but actually there could be third spaces, there could be people working on the road, all sorts of different scenarios. And again, even in the London context, what is the home? Because some people's home is London, but also they have their cottage in the country or their house in France. So that's also been regarded as home as well. So there's multiple homes and multiple potential offices. Is that a conversation you're seeing now in businesses, that people trying to think about what a new work arrangement might be for business?
Yes, it's a simple answer to that. We've certainly been advising clients on home working arrangements, flexible working arrangements. What I have seen actually in the last few weeks or so is this talk about third party office space where people can drop in and do some work, which would be close to their home. So certainly in the London area, we have a number of spaces where you can drop in and hire a desk. Easy in, easy out. That's not so prevalent, I don't think, outside of London. But with the amount of commercial property on the market now, there's some talk about that commercial property being converted into flexible working space for people to come in and out of. And that will make it much easier for people who are not, who haven't got the space at home to do work. So there are conversations starting. I still think it's a little bit too early to really say what the future is going to be. I think there's a general appetite for staff and for employers to get people back into the office space as soon as it's safe to do so and practical to do so. And a lot of this is very much dependent on the medical interventions, the vaccine, the treatments. I think that's a game changer. The testing, for example, which was discussed yesterday, the rapid testing, I think that will change the whole complexion of what we're talking about here. So I think it's too early to write off office space and changes of us, start to speculate what the changes might be. We have learned something as a society, I think, as a result of this, and probably some good lessons as well about the need to travel, the need to be ever present in an office. And I think these are perhaps changes that will be good changes. So we'll view those in the future. But I think we're still in the early stages of understanding what this means for the long term.
Yeah, I was in a conversation actually only yesterday with various people from around the world actually talking about this. And there was definitely a sense that actually there'd been a big pressure even last year and the year before for people to have more flexible arrangements about where they work. So in a pre-COVID world, that conversation was very live. And what's happened since March for many of us is the people who were perhaps most resistant to that were actually the senior middle managers who had, for their whole life, commuted into the office, worked in the office all day, and commuted home. And suddenly they're all working from home, and they're going, well, actually, it's not that bad after all. Maybe this does work. It just feels like we're on the cusp of some change, but maybe it's not so simplistic as it's work from home or work in the office, that there's a number of different nuances to that are appearing.
Yeah, and also with regard to that, I mean, people's homes are not necessarily set up for home working, and particularly with the other pressures of homeschooling and it's made life very difficult. I think that, and that's why I think there's still an appetite to at least have part of the working time in an office space.
Yeah. Annie, again, just to touch on this with you a second, you're probably ahead actually of many businesses in the Aldgate area in terms of getting your staff back. That's my perception, at least. But has the conversation started to think about this issue about what does the future hold? Do we keep all our staff, and I don't know if your staff are all concentrated in one or two buildings, or do we think of a more dispersed model that, as Peter's saying, people are starting to think about?
Yeah, we've got offices all over the world. In the UK, we are predominantly in the London office. We do have other offices regionally around the country, but our largest workforce by far is in London. And traditionally, we've had a little bit of working from home or working remotely, but it's not been something that we've actively encouraged or had a huge volume of take up for. Perception of how working from home can add value to the business has really changed in the last 3 or 4 months. We've still delivered all the services that we needed to deliver to our clients. That's really, anybody who was concerned or worried about it in the past, can now see that there is a value of it. So conversations about work-life balance are more and more prevalent now. And we are just looking at what our future world looks like in terms of agility, and just what we can do to help balance that for people. I think there always will be a need for the office space, particularly going back to my earlier comments around those face-to-face meetings that are so important in the relationship world.
Yeah.
But I do think the work-life balance will become more and more of a topic of conversation and something that we will all kind of factor in. I don't think we'll ever have 100% back 100% of the time now.
It's interesting, isn't it?
Can I jump in?
Sure, absolutely.
Just following on from, I think Annie raised a really important point about the work-life balance and sort of a recognition now that this sort of increased working from home isn't necessarily sort of a temporary thing. We are likely to be in it for the long haul, and sort of on a more permanent basis as well, looking at no one knows what that will look like, but there are just sort of talking to businesses and sort of hearing how it's affecting workers. There seem to be some really clear pros and cons in terms of sort of increased flexible and agile and remote working. So for example, some really positive things in terms of equality and diversity, like you're saying, work-life balance and sort of additional time that people can spend with their families or exercise or a hobby, for example. But on the flip side, some sort of really some challenges as well. So things like musculoskeletal risk, if you don't have an office or you don't have sort of a proper setup, that's it's not great to be working sort of your normal working hours with that, but also sort of digital detox and being able to switch off when your office is in your bedroom or in your kitchen at home. So it's been really interesting to see that. And sort of I hosted an online roundtable discussion earlier this week with some representatives from the legal sector in the city, and we're talking about mental health and sort of lessons learned, and it really came across. It was quite striking. It was really mixed bag, so it'd be interesting to see what happens going further.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting area, and again, you hear some really good anecdotes about people who've got a better health and well-being by being at home more, and equally stories which is absolute reverse. And it's really interesting. There's winners and losers all the time, isn't there? I'm going to open it up. Sorry, Kieran. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it sort of ties in nicely with some of the work we're doing in terms of creating these walking and cycling corridors, particularly in central London, which is that, if people do want to come in and feel safe, they can also get the benefits of a more joined up, hopefully connected cycle and walking network, which is something that us as TfL have been looking to do for quite some time now. And obviously these measures we're bringing in on a temporary basis, but there could be scope for some real sort of long-term benefits and changes happening in terms of how people commute into work. And one of the big challenges was safety, particularly for cyclists in central London. And these sort of corridors that we're now looking to introduce will hopefully enable to sort of give people that assurance that, it is safe to cycle or walk, and that rather than maybe commuting between two stations, they walk across the bridge, and playing into sort of the public health element as well, that when people are coming back in, there are sort of alternatives as well that can boost their health and well-being.
I think, Kieran, it's so fascinating, and I think, again, we've all learned such a huge amount over recent months, but I think that kind of world where the gym perhaps has been closed, but actually I can get exercise walking to the shops in my local home, from my local home, or actually now I can get exercise by cycling to my place of work, and I don't necessarily need to go through the experience of going underground or going on the bus. And I just think it is really interesting, which I guess ties into that whole conversation about that 15-minute city, that 15-minute walk perhaps, but also the 15-minute cycle, which, I think when people saw the fresh air and the lack of traffic and the quiet roads, we all became cyclists for a few weeks. Now the traffic's returning, we're all kind of looking at the bus and the tube again a little bit, but it's been interesting for us all to experience that. I just want to see if I can draw in Fiona again. We'll have one last chance, Fiona, see if we can hear you. There's, again, we've heard a little bit from what's going on in the city. Do you get a sense that people are starting to return in significant numbers into the workplaces in Tower Hamlets, or do you think people are still quite reticent? Ross, your name's appeared. You're unmuted. Ask away.
Hi there. Yeah, sorry. My name's Ross Hughes. I actually happen to work with Fiona as well for Tower Hamlets Council.
Fantastic.
Team, for Middlesex Street. It was interesting to listen to you all here, and I think some of the issues that seem to be is that either the risk of people coming into the office or understanding working arrangements. What I found speaking to some different architectural firms or interior design firms is that they're starting to differentiate different roles and kind of separate different teams to help bring people back. Understanding you can't really full on bring everyone from the whole department back or the whole business. Obviously that will flood a lot of the offices, but selecting different people, either one person from the design element, one person from communications or business, and having selected different people in the team seems to help encourage people coming back more. I think just trying to prescribe that innovation into businesses now may be the way forward as well. It'd be interesting to see what people's thoughts are if they've heard other businesses trying to do that as well.
I think, Ross, it's really interesting. We've been doing a lot of survey work, not just for our own businesses, but for other businesses, trying to understand which bits of the business really are suffering and could do with being back in the office. And again, really trying to put a priority around those pieces. You're hearing sometimes it's key bits of IT really need to be there, and there's other parts which I think are much more personal things, and we heard it earlier within the panel that there are individuals who just find it really tough to work from home, and particularly the younger people. And I think that's a common message we're all hearing, that they miss particularly the socialization, but also they don't have the home that necessarily lends itself to also being an office. So I think that's where we're focusing our priority. I don't know about you, Annie. How are you being selective in terms of which groups come back?
At the moment, it's entirely voluntary, so people can just say, I'd like to come into the office, and we're making that space available. But it is predominantly certainly at the start, it was predominantly those people that were kind of sharing accommodation, didn't have their own space or any outdoor space particularly, who were just struggling with the home office environment. They just don't have the room to do that. We've had a couple of examples of people where there was a house share of 4 people all trying to work from home, all doing very different roles, all kind of on their headphones and microphones all the time, and you just couldn't concentrate, you couldn't work at all. So those type of people were the first people coming back. We're now finding actually a lot of people just want a change of environment. They just want to test out that journey. They just want to test out that office. So it's changing. So we initially started with the people really struggling, but it is a wider scope of people now that are starting to come in.
And I guess there's also sort of underpinning everything is sort of what we call the hidden workforce. So sort of cleaners, security, staff who sort of in more routine service and manual roles who have sort of continued to travel into the workplace throughout the pandemic, and often sort of due to socioeconomic status or sort of ethnicity, they might be at higher risk of COVID as well. So it's about how do we help businesses to consider what their specific health and wellbeing needs are in the work that they're carrying out, because it's often quite different to sort of desk-based workers.
That's really interesting. Just if you don't mind me, just one more point I just wanted to raise it, because I appreciate Fiona can really speak a lot on our behalf for the High Streets team. But some of the things that we're trying out from the council perspective, one of the roles that I'm tasked with is to deliver a lot of capital schemes which involve some public realm improvements, in particular for the Aldgate area, Middlesex Street area, and we are taking a keen focus on how this is future-proofed going forward, that we're not just planking a load of benches together, but people can feel that they are in a spacious environment and people can move around in these places, particularly where there's Petticoat Lane Market currently. And we do want to try and see encouragement come back to the area, even though it can be blocked. So we are seeing a new way of that's being worked. So that's one of the things we're looking at. We're also looking at piloting home delivery services with cargo bikes. So with any businesses that may find that they don't have the support or able to do that delivery service or use DHL as one of the examples anyway that are high costing, we're looking at more economical and environmental friendly delivery schemes for some of the most vulnerable in the area, or people who are a little bit more vulnerable to leave the house during these unprecedented times.
That's really interesting, Ross. And I just wonder, Kieran, we think of cyclists as being commuters or recreational cyclists. We don't really think of them as deliverers of public transport or e-cargo, but that could and maybe should be a key part of the strategy, or maybe it is.
Yeah, it certainly is, and our team that is looking at our sort of travel demand management across the whole network is looking at how we retime deliveries and some of these corridors where we've put restrictions in for vehicles. It's working with those sort of major freight bodies to say how that they can do things differently as well. So that's part of the sort of big picture of the change that with boroughs we're looking to deliver as well, on top of sort of infrastructure changes on the ground.
And Zenia, one thing so interesting, I think, again, we focus very much on trying to free up space on the street so people can be in the open air. And I think, as Ross is talking about, the idea of the market and open air retail, it all sort of fits with a picture of fresh air, openness, and not being inside, which I think people tend to feel more comfortable with at the moment. But obviously we're still in the sort of final throes of the dwindling summer. Sunshine is gradually disappearing, but we get into the winter. That's a lot more complicated, isn't it, to try and keep that open air experience alive, which again, so many businesses are really thriving from.
Yeah, it's so true, and it's sort of thinking about other countries where you have a lot more sort of life is lived more outside, but obviously there's sort of the weather to support that. Just thinking about the city, I know, and in other areas as well, there has been sort of quite a bit of support helping businesses to sort of develop space outside of their premises. So sort of how can pavement space be allocated in a way that's safe and doesn't sort of restrict space for pedestrians, and sort of thinking ahead to the winter, how can that how can that continue in a way that doesn't sort of negatively impact the environment as well, with heaters and things like that. So a lot of it is, I guess, still very much up in the air, and we're going to sort of be sort of working through that as we go into autumn and winter.
Because I never cease to be surprised in the deepest, darkest winter in the city, how many people will stand outside the pub and have a drink. So maybe we're more resilient than we think we are. Terrific.
I was just going to say, I think when you were asking me some questions earlier, you asked what we kind of put in place to help support getting colleagues back into work, because that's been really important. So we've done a number of documents that we've shared with people in terms of the guidance around how the office works, frequently asked questions, trying to explain some of the government advice to them in terms of how it works in our environment rather than as generic advice. We've done video walkthroughs of how you get in and out of the building and manoeuvre around the building, how you use the meeting space. A lot of visual documentation that's gone out to people, which has received some really positive feedback. So that's been really, really helpful to help people imagine what their day-to-day life would be like if they're still a bit nervous about coming into the office. So if anyone is thinking of opening up, I would recommend that kind of literature. That's been really beneficial for people. That's something that you should consider.
It's really interesting, actually.
Can I add on to that, Ian? Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. Go ahead.
Yeah, it sounds what Annie's done is actually above and beyond what a lot of organisations are doing, and that's pretty impressive stuff. I mean, the key foundation for bringing staff back into the office is to ensure that your office is COVID secure, which is one of these news phrases that's recently been bandied around. But there's some great information on the government website about how you go about making your office or your workspace, because it does cater for different types of workspace, COVID secure. So that's always the first step. The second step is to consult with your staff. So there's been a lot of information and news about, the employer has the right to bring staff back to the workplace, but the provisions within employment law still stand, and the requirement to be reasonable in your expectations are still there. So it's not as simple as stating that you expect all employees to return to the workspace. There has to be some level of consultation and individual consultation, because every single employee will have different circumstances that need to be worked out and balanced up, and reasons for coming to the office and not returning to the office, and they have to be assessed on an individual basis. I suspect it's going to be the old 80-20 rule. I suspect 80% of staff will come back if you ask them to come back, as long as those provisions are in place, and there'll be 20% who are going to be a little bit more hesitant, and you'd have to work perhaps a bit harder to get them back to the workplace, or find some form of compromise, because that's what ultimately it's going to come down to, is compromise.
Yeah, I think one of the issues, and again, I think we're struggling with it as a business, as probably as well as anyone. We're developing our own COVID safe measures for our own office as a kind of prelude to kind of welcoming people back. And what we're finding with that is actually the measures themselves are becoming a barrier to people wanting to come back. So actually, it's pretty difficult to do a call like we're doing now if you're all wearing face masks. And actually, at the moment, we're thinking, well, they may have to wear face masks in an open plan office, and if they're doing conversations with other people. So you get this sort of complexity that you think it's going to be easy, but there's another sort of twist or a turn and then people saying, well, actually, I don't really need to come into the office to do calls, Zoom calls, but maybe it's to have a meeting. And then you think, well, actually, you can't really get the people in the meeting room because you're all socially separated. So then it comes back to the question, well, what can I do in the office that's really, really, really meaningful and that's worth that hour, 2-hour commute, whatever that commute is?
And sort of coming back to sort of the COVID secure guidance as well, it's really at its core is that what you ultimately don't want is that you sort of start to bring staff back and then you get an outbreak and then it's sort of back to square one again. So it's
Correct.
how do you bring staff back, but in a way where it's really, really safe, really secure. You're sort of reducing risk as much as possible, and so that you are able to open and bring staff back and continue to do that, rather than having to sort of sway and sort of all of the business challenges that come along with that.
Yeah. One of the things that we're finding, and I don't know if you're seeing the same in the city necessarily. I haven't been into the city now since March, so I don't really have a kind of first-hand experience. But we're seeing this thing where people's offices are still largely closed, but they are wanting to have business meetings with other clients or contacts, and they're using the third space of the pub or the restaurants, which are largely starting to reopen, or certainly in the West End are. And it's kind of curious that people are actually having meetings in a restaurant or a bar rather than actually having a meeting in their own office. And again, even to the extent where now people are meeting like spies in parks. Where they're meeting in a third space actually in order to have a meeting and then go their separate ways again. It's really interesting how people are sort of moving around the office, but actually still trying to do their day-to-day business.
It's really interesting, and it's just so the variety of ways that people are sort of conducting business now, and sort of what Annie was saying sort of right at the beginning about sort of that important interaction between sort of businesses and clients, and the way that that's been done in the past, and how we're going to see that going forward as well. It's just absolutely fascinating. I know that some businesses are quite hesitant to have visitors in, so it might well be sort of the use of the third spaces. And I know so many bars and restaurants are taking as many stringent measures as they can, and sort of taking test and trace details and all of the measures that they're putting in. So that is fascinating to see.
Yeah. And Kieran, just one more question from me to you, which was really about, do you sense, and you sense it in traffic, kind of cars driving, that the outer boroughs, perhaps where more people are living, are actually getting much busier, and the city centre boroughs are still quite quiet? Is that pattern true on what you're seeing on the underground and in bus passengers, or is that just perception?
I think some of the data does show that in outer London you are sort of seeing high streets actually sort of picking up again, as opposed to the centre, because people are obviously closer to home and they might be going down to their local coffee shop as opposed to eating in a restaurant in the city. But I think buses are certainly back up to kind of levels that kind of as an organisation we would expect to happen. And the tube, as I mentioned earlier, it's definitely growing each sort of week as we move into September. I think one of the key things is obviously the schools going back as well, and the fact that over the last week or two we've had to put on additional services for school children, which is part of our whole sort of reassurance message as well to the public that we're doing everything we can to make sure that we've got services for school children travelling as well, because we know that in peak times that can obviously lead to the social distancing measures not being observed. And so I think we've got that challenge across the whole of London really. But I suppose just to add in terms of what we have a duty to do is it's not just sort of to provide the infrastructure on the ground, it's also sort of engaging with business communities as well. And we're doing that in a number of ways. We've got a number of webinars coming up over the next week or two where we have senior people from TfL addressing certain concerns, whether it's our street space program, whether it's looking at sort of controlling crowds. And the idea is to make sure that we reach as many businesses as possible to reassure them and their staff that our network is safe, reliable and clean and fit for purpose in these sort of challenging times.
Absolutely. I neglected to introduce Natasha earlier, who was going to run a couple of quick polls. So we've got a couple of minutes left. So I don't know, Natasha, do you want to just tee up the polls for us? Here we go. So this kind of open-ended question, and again, you'll all come from different backgrounds, but when do you plan to come back to the office? And you need to just go to the little button that says polls and see if you can answer that. How many seconds have we got to answer? And am I right, we got a second poll? Oh, here we go. Here's the results already. Wow, that's great. So 78 are already back. That's pretty amazing. So that's way higher than I think any of us were thinking, perhaps. But the end of the year figure seems to resonate, I think, with a lot of people. It feels like towards the end of the year or early next year. So when does the year end? Is it in January? I don't know. And am I right? We got another poll as well, Natasha. Yeah, here we go. So what are the priorities to get employees back to work? You know, is it the public transport, the public realm? And we're seeing a lot of changes around that, repurposing streets, financial support, and then obviously safety. So a bit more mixed, but yeah, surprise, surprise, safety. And Kieran, you'll be pleased to hear public transport. So everyone's priority. So again, not a huge surprise there, but and the safety one, Zena, is probably the hardest to pin down. So good. So I'm just going to whiz around our little panel here. We're right on the final minutes. Just one quick last point or observation, if everyone wants to just make before we all depart. So I'll kick off with you, Zena, because you're at the top left in my screen.
Thanks. Just to say there is a lot of information, guidance, support available. It's on the City of London website or businesshealthy.org. So please do have a look and feel free to drop me a line. I'm happy to speak. Thanks.
Terrific. Thank you so much. Annie.
I probably would just say, you know, if you haven't been back into the city yet, give it a try. Even if you just come in for a couple of hours out of kind of core travel time, but it is interesting to see it, and it's not as daunting as you think. And actually, once you're back in the swing of coming back into London, it's really nice to be back, and it's good having the office open. And as long as you've got the right balance in place and you're confident in your safety measures, I think it's a really good thing. So give it a go.
Right. Peter.
Yes, I think the key thing for me is ensuring that the office is COVID secure, and then dealing with issues on a case by case, individual by individual basis, and just be realistic that it's not going to be simple to get everyone back in the office at the same time.
Great, Kieran.
Yeah, I'll just add that there's lots of ways now in this digital world where you can plan your journey. TfL's website is live and up to date with the latest travels. So there are different options on there to take different routes. We've just launched a TfL Go app as well, which gives alternatives to taking the tube. So it's about tapping into these type of things with apps and other sort of online portals that can give people that clarity and options in terms of their journeys and their journey times.
Great. And Ross, thank you so much for jumping in for Fiona. I'll let you speak on her behalf to just close us out.
Yeah, no problem at all. Nothing else from us. I think the main thing that we're just going to continue doing is working with the local businesses as well as the TAP to provide as much availability of our services and carry on trying to improve the area, maximising social distancing from a public realm point of view as well.
Terrific. Well, just thank you. I want to just thank everyone really for taking part today. It's been a really, really fascinating conversation, and I think I'm very confident within a few months Aldgate will become the busy, vibrant area it always has been, or has been for many, many generations. And we, as the Business Improvement District, again, going to be working hard with Tower Hamlets and the city just to see are we doing everything we can do really to help businesses navigate this new world that we're all transitioning through. But just to say thank you very, very much to everyone for taking part. Thank you very much for attending. Sorry, Fiona, about the technology, and I think Ray had a similar issue and disappeared. But he did send a little message saying they haven't really had to enforce all the special measures that the government have been putting in place, because actually people have been very compliant. I guess we'll all try to stay up to date with what the new guidance is, but hopefully we'll all get through this together, and I'm sure we will. Thank you very much indeed.